there are so many things that can come up for us, especially as people of African descent, when we have to re-experience these moments of seeing our brothers, seeing our sisters slain, murdered by people who are, whether they're civilians or the police, I don't care who they are, or the title that they hold. Black people dying in America at the hands of racism is detrimental, is negatively impacting to our psyche. I don't care who says it isn't. I don't care who says like racism isn't relevant in America. It is impacting us on a daily, every single day, on a daily basis. We see racism, whether it's directly impacting us, whether it's a direct experience, whether we see it within structures, systemic structures, whether it's the school system, the governmental system, financial systems. We are impacted by racism every single day. And it makes the experience that we have even more complex when we are watching stories like this unfold, when we are watching trials like this unfold on national TV, having to relive our brother. And, my heart goes out for his mother so bad. My heart goes out for this family, having to be in the courtrooms, having to see images of our brother Ahmaud Arbery, his body, him running for his life, even comments like talking about his dirty toenails or what have you, painting this image as if he's a barbaric human being. Having to relive these experiences in combination with the racism that we experience every single day is traumatizing. And that's why as Black people, as individuals of Black African descent, we have to be mindful of what we are consuming in the media. Not to say that we shouldn't watch these types of things, because of course we should be informed, but we have to know when to turn the TV off. We have to know when to take these things into moderation. Take them in with moderation. We have to know when to not to consume social media all day, every day, trying to keep up with what's happening in the trial. Like I literally saw people doing that and texting me and talking about how they wanted to be aware of like what's going on, but also it's impacting their psyche. We have to be mindful of this. And I know we're still in the hot off the press segment, so I'm going to slow down a bit. But we really just have to be mindful of how much of these things we're consuming, because it is traumatizing. Listen, the shirt says, I felt like my brand shirts will be very fitting for this episode. We have PTSD too. And this is not a plug. This is not me trying to push anything. This is literally Black people in America. When we talk about PTSD, and I'm gonna save that for a little bit later when we talk about racial trauma. But okay, we back in hot off the press. Y'all can tell this is a topic that I'm very passionate about, because it has impacted our brothers and sisters for centuries. And we really have to be mindful of when these types of things are being brought up in the media. But we going back to hot off the press. We're going back to hot off the press. Okay, so that's not even the real tea. So we know, okay, these people, I was about to say these brothers, these individuals were on trial for killing our brother. They were sentenced. But the real tea, let me tell y'all what the real tea is, because this was released about like maybe 10, 12 hours ago. Under a social media post where they had posted the killers were convicted of life sentences and what have you, a Georgia deputy was suspended after commenting on the Ahmaud Arbery case. So under that social media post, this Georgia deputy, he commented, that criminal Arbery still got the death penalty. So we're just going to sit back and let that marinate for a bit. That criminal Arbery still got the death penalty. As if for this family and for Black people as a whole, as if watching this situation play out wasn't traumatizing enough. As if listening to the lawyers in the courtroom try to demonize her poor son and to make him as if he's an uncivilized individual, as if that wasn't enough, as if the dagger wasn't driven deep enough. you had to comment to make it even deeper. You had to twist the knife to make us feel that wound. But what I will say is that I'm not surprised. Cops is going to cop, like deputy is going to deputy. Like these law enforcement systems in America, their foundation, they're based in very racist structures, right? So we know that the police system is it replicates very, very racist structures. I'm not surprised that this Georgia deputy would have commented something so disgusting, as if, again, Ahmaud Arbery was a criminal. I'm not surprised, because we know that the police structures, the law enforcement structures in America are based on very racist structures. They're rooted in racism. They're rooted in the history of law enforcement and policing in America is based on the slave patrols, right? Patrolling enslaved individuals. So we know that because this is the foundation, that many police officers are have these same rhetoric. So that's not even surprising to me. I guess what really got under my skin with this comment was the fact that you heard the judge, you heard his speech about how heinous this crime was, but yet you were still privileged enough to comment it, and you thought you was going to get some likes, or people was going to have you back, which I'm sure they probably do have his back, don't get me wrong. And I don't think that the consequences are going to even be that intense for him. I don't have faith in our justice system. I really don't. One of my homies, Phil Roundtree, he's going to be on the podcast soon, but he had a post out that said, Ahmaud Arbery getting his the individuals who killed him, them getting life in prison, that's not justice. That's an outlier. We're like, this isn't something that Black people get in America. This is an outlying situation. We're still fighting to get justice. We're still fighting for equality in this nation. And because I know that we have a history of not getting justice in America, again, I don't think that he is going to be tried. Like, I don't think that he's going to have significant consequences for the comment that he shared. And because, y'all, this is going into like the actual topic of today's conversation, Black people check in, because we know that there are very racist law enforcement systems out there, because we know that there are people who still argue that Ahmaud Arbery was a criminal. We know that there are still people out there who felt as though these men who killed Ahmaud Arbery should get parole or a lesser sentence. We know that these people are out there. That is why I am encouraging you, brothers and sisters, to check in with yourselves. Think about what it was like for you to consume this information while you were watching it on TV, while you were allowing it to unfold on social media, while you were mindlessly scrolling and just kind of like looking at all these different images pop up, whether if it was of Ahmaud Arbery or him running for his life. Or check in with yourself. We're not only talking about how it impacts us on a societal level, how it impacts us on a cultural level, but I feel like mainstream America, like people in the media, we're just now getting to the place where in these conversations we have with racism, regarding racism, we're finally starting to talk about mental health and how that impacts us on an emotional level. People have been doing this research for years. Like, y'all hear me talk about Dr. Joy DeGroy all the time. I always say she is one of the GOATs of Black mental health. And that's why we had the Dr. Jules Harrells at Howard University talking about Black mental health. We have so many people in the field doing the research and discussing these things, but we haven't really talked about it in mainstream media to the degree that we have been over the past, let's say, 2 years until recently, when we did have our brother George Floyd, the Breonna Taylors, the Ahmaud Arbery's. When that was going on, that's when we started to become more aware of it in mainstream media. So I'm here to remind you that the information that we consume in media is not just stuff that you can kind of like read and just not think about. It impacts you on a level even if you don't think it does, even if you don't realize it does. Anytime you see images of people who look like you, people who resemble you, people who you have similar characteristics as being gunned down in the street, having a knee in their neck, being shot while in bed sleeping. When things like this happen and you resonate with them, like, oh my goodness, she looks like me. Oh my goodness, that looks like my uncle. That could be my brother. That creates a level of fear and anxiety that becomes so difficult for a lot of people to overcome. It creates a sense of, it creates a trauma response in a lot of people. Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome. She talks about how individuals collectively, how they can experience historical trauma on a collective level, i.e. slavery, and that same group of people experiencing trauma generationally, from generation to generation, continued racism, how that impacts us on so many levels. And she coined the term post-traumatic slave syndrome. And even as we transition from the hot off the press segment, talking about, our brother, Ahmaud Arbery, talking about the 3 killers and this individual who felt the privilege to comment something so idiotic. I want us to also think about, like, okay, in what other ways last week could I have my mental health could have been impacted without me even realizing it? Hashtag we have PTSD too. I'm going to quickly read an excerpt from the book Manichean Psychology, The Psychology of Racism, written by Dr. Jules Harrell. So here's the book right here. He's a professor at Howard University. I had the brief opportunity to share a panel with him. He's just an individual with a wealth of knowledge. And in his book, I'm just going to briefly read it. The total expression of modern racism creates a Manichean universe in which the oppressed are doomed to live out their lives. In his discussion of racism and psychopathology, Fanon, 1967, used the term Manichean to describe the world of the colonized. In fact, the adherents of the teachings of Manichaeus in the 3rd century AD saw an inherent conflict between light and darkness. The impact of this dualistic philosophy on Europe seems to be quite profound. The Manicheans conceived of blackness and things associated with it as evil. So black was associated with evil. Whiteness or light became associated with good. It is not difficult to see how the Manichean order manifests itself along racial lines. People of African descent become associated with evil and inferiority. We come to see Caucasians as superior and inherently good. Now, this is what he describes as the psychology of racism and defining that Manichean concept. Seeing black as evil, seeing light or whiteness as good, desirable, idealized. And now we saw this manifested in the way the situation unfolded, why they killed our brother Ahmaud Arbery, because why? Blackness, his skin color, was associated with evil. It was associated with being uncivilized. It was associated with being barbaric. That was also, I'd like to argue, the reason why the defense attorney had to make comment of his toenails or his socks or what have you. Like, how dare you? It was because she saw his blackness as evil. I'd like to also argue as we transition, like I said, y'all, we had a pretty heavy week last week, and I'm just here to process it with you. Last week, we also saw in social media how the situation unfolded with a podcast. And I'm not even going to say this podcast name because I'm not trying to give them no airtime. I think we did enough of that. There was a podcast with 2 brothers. And I'm not going to call them brothers. I'm going to check myself in that moment. I'm not going to call them brothers. There was a podcast with two individuals, and basically they were saying like, oh, I don't date black people. They were talking about the app that's associated with dating black people. So black people trying to find black people, right? And so they said, I mean, hey, bro, that's how they sounded. I mean, hey, bro, if you want to date a bunch of Shaniquas, go for it. Do you like my impression? But in all seriousness, so he was basically saying, if you want to date a bunch of Shaniquas, that's what he was referring to as black women, then go for it. Me and Fresh being the other person who runs the podcast, aren't really down with the brown like that, being night riders. Sometimes if they're a red bone, going back to Manishian psychology, right? So seeing, as they stated, quote unquote, night riders, seeing blackness as evil, red bone or light-skinned women as being more idealized, being more beautiful. Going back to the quote, but I mean in general, me and Fresh don't dabble in the dark, if you know what I mean. As a black woman, I had to really be mindful of what I was taking in. And I'm not even going to say as a black woman. I'm going to say as a black person. Because I talked to many black men out there who listened to the rhetoric that these two individuals were spewing on their podcast. And they were fired up as well. They had significant emotion as well. So I don't think it had much to do with me being a black woman, because this really is speaking to the stereotypes that these individuals have internalized about the racial groups that they are either associated with or are a part of. I don't know how they identify. I don't know if they're black, or somebody said one of them was black. And with me not even knowing how they identify, I'm just going to say, a person of color, people of color, right? When people of color see people spewing this type of hateful rhetoric about their own group, it evokes an emotional response. That is why we saw Joe Budden coming to the defense of black women. There was an emotional response that was evoked from that. Now, granted, I love how he read these boys down, like he read them down. And that's what they are, little boys. He read them down, okay? And I loved every bit of it. But before we get into the read, I want us to really check in with ourselves. Like, okay, even after hearing me talk about some of the rhetoric that they were discussing, what were you feeling listening to this podcast? What was coming up for you? Were there thoughts that may have been surfaced? The reason why I want you to do this is because we really have to get in the habit of practicing how to check in with ourselves. But when we hear things, when we hear experiences of racism that could compound experiences that we've already had, we have to really stop and check in with ourselves, get in tune with how we're feeling. How could this be impacting me cognitively? How could this be impacting me emotionally? What am I thinking about myself? This has changed my perspective, my perspective of myself and my peers. So that's what I want us to do, right? But I also want us to keep in mind that we're not just talking about two people of color or however they identify. We're talking about people of color who have what we call internalized racism. And so internalized racism is a concept in which an individual begins to internalize some of the stereotypes associated with people of color, believing those stereotypes related to people of color, and then internalizing it and beginning to spew it. That is internalized racism. As Black people, we have to preserve ourselves. We have to preserve our energy. I always say it is not my job to educate anybody about racism. Either you get it or you don't. There are books out there, hashtag Dr. Jules Harrell. There are, post-traumatic slave syndrome. Even Kendi got his book out. It's so many books, so many resources. Google Scholar, not just Google Scholar with some credible sources. It's so many things out there that you can do to read this stuff on your own. But I refuse to allow my emotions to get revved up over somebody else's ignorance. So as Black people, I really want us to begin to check in with ourselves. Ask yourself, am I consuming too much of this information on social media? Am I following this trial too much? Is it causing certain anxiety-based symptoms to be triggered in my body? When I read this case, am I getting tension in my stomach? Am I getting, or my hands shaking? Is it causing different memories of my past experiences of racism to be triggered? Am I being triggered by these moments? And if so, it is totally okay, bro. It is totally okay, sis, to take a step back and to no longer consume it. You can give yourself breaks from this thing. Black people check in, y'all. That's the whole point of today's episode. Black people check in. Listen, y'all. I know, today was a little bit more condensed. I'm not even going to go into the other segment. So I know I keep saying to ask Dr. Chanda. Y'all going to kill me if I'm not reading y'all questions. But I really want us to focus in on the trauma, our pain, and really just thinking about how we could have been impacted by some of the things that have unfolded last week. This is my passion. I have so many notes going into racial trauma and how trauma impacts us on various yourself. So y'all, it's been real. Do me a favor. If you haven't texted podcast to 21000, I need you to do that. So that's 21 and then 3 zeros. 21000. Text podcast to that so that you can stay in the loop with everything that we have going on. So y'all, next week I have a very special guest. I'm going to allow y'all to guess who it is. So oftentimes when I post like a video or a picture, anytime my face is shown, somebody, it never fails. At least one person in my comments is going to say, "Oh, Dr. Chanda, you look like so-and-so." That's who I'm having on my podcast next week. And if you can guess it, if you can guess that person, and put them in my DM, put their name in my DM, I'll send you one of my African pendants or something from my shop. But you have to guess them correctly. So if you do that, you put it in my DM, you will certainly get one of my African pendants, y'all. Do me a favor, y'all. When you while you're listening to this podcast, I want you to screenshot it, whether you're listening to it on your Apple Podcast or Spotify or what have you, or on YouTube. I want you to screenshot, post it in your story, and at me. Also, when you write a review, you can be featured in the next episode. So go ahead, write your review, and so you can be featured in the next episode. You can also get my shirt. We have PTSD 2 in my shop, the Minds of the Culture shop, mindsoftheculture.org. So mindsoftheculture.org. I'll also put the link below. Also, if you want to start a podcast of your own, you can go ahead and click the link that is in the show description here so that you can start a podcast. I believe everybody has a voice. Everybody's anointed to do something. Therefore, how are you allowing yourself to your gifts to be seen? How are you allowing your anointing to be felt? You have the power to create the emotions that you want to experience. It's been real, y'all. I'll see y'all next week with my special guest. All right, y'all. See you.